Hi everybody. Oh wow, a very official notice right at the start there. So good evening everybody. It is absolutely lovely to see so many of you in this virtual room. It's fantastic. My name's Lindsay Smith, as Jess just mentioned. I am basically freelance doing this kind of work. So I've worked in universities for many years, and a few years ago I started freelance, and I now do these kind of things full time. So what we are hoping to get out of tonight in terms of you guys as parents is really just to give you as much information as possible. I know when I went to university, my poor mum was terrified and didn't know anything that was going on. I can only imagine, well, I have to confess at this point, really, for years, I always thought that parents who were really involved in their students' UCAS journey and showed up with them on the first day and tried to influence course choice, I was always a little bit judgy about it because I thought, well, leave it to the student. And then the reality happened. I became a parent myself, and I can completely now understand how stressful it is for parents on the other side of this journey, worrying about finance, worrying about course choices, worrying about what's going to happen to your son or daughter when they go off to university. And so that is a large part of the reason why we wanted to run the event tonight, is just to give you all that reassurance, to give you an opportunity to ask those questions that may be keeping you up at night already. So that's a lot of what I'm going to be talking about this evening. I am just going to share my screen so that you can see my presentation. Give me one sec, sorry. Okay, so, oh, sorry, do you know what I'm doing? Sorry, John. I've just realised I'm going into my own talk. I'm going over to John in a moment. Sorry, I'll stick to the programme. So yeah, that's essentially what we're going to deal with. John is going to speak next, and he's going to tell you a lot more about those open days that you can go and experience those universities, get a real insight. So essentially, it's just to answer all of those questions so that you feel completely clued up when you go along to those kinds of things as well. In terms of my own experience, like I mentioned, I've worked within universities. I've been involved a lot with admissions and done a lot of outreach. I've read thousands of personal statements. We've got John here, who is obviously an expert on open days, does all kinds with finance as well. And then Sean from the University of Chester. So a fantastic programme. What I would say is please make the most of tonight. If there are any questions that are playing on your mind, anything that you're concerned about, please just ask any of us, because you've got this one opportunity, so please take it. No questions are going to be judged. It's purely to give you all that reassurance. So on that note, I will now, instead of trying to take over the programme, so sorry, John, hand over to John, and I will come back at the end. And yeah, sorry about that, John. So John's from Uni Taste Days, and he'll be telling you all about open days, what to look out for, and how to make the most of them. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Lindsay, and a big hello, everybody. As Lindsay said, my name is John, and I'm here from Uni Taste Days. You might not have heard of Uni Taste Days, and you might be wondering who I am and kind of what I do. So what we do is go into schools and speak to students, speak to parents, speak to teachers about university. We run lots of independent workshops looking at that. And what we also do is we're a website where students, parents, and teachers can find university events. So in terms of my session, my link to it, where I'm going to focus on essentially the pre-application things. So how to pick a university, how students can, what students can look out for when it comes to picking universities. That's essentially the things that I'm going to pick up as part of it. One thing I should say right at the start though is I absolutely love events with parents. I do a lot of university teachers conferences where universities basically host events and teachers join them to find out about all aspects of university. And recently I've been doing a lot of sessions about engaging with parents and the importance of parental engagement. And the last session I did was for another university, and it was all, and basically the discussion was from, I think it was a school, one of the questions that came, and a school said, look, we don't have many of our students go to university. What can we do to not force people to go to university, because university isn't for everyone, but what can we do to encourage more students to think about university? And the two things I suggested you both getting as part of this program. So the first thing is literally to engage with parents more, like tell parents about university, because you are so important in the young person that you support's education journey. So parental engagement, and our job tonight, Lindsay, Jess, Sean, and myself, our job is to tell you about the key facts when it comes to university. So we've got that, the first point ticked. The second thing is tell parents, tell students about student finance. And Sean's going to do a session later on looking at student finance, because student finance is the biggest barrier to university. So what I mean by that is the biggest reason that students don't go to university is related to the cost of it. So it's great, as part of this program, you've got a session on student finance that will be really helpful for you. So a big thank you to Higher Horizons. Thank you to Jess, who's organised this event with Lindsay, for inviting me along today. One thing, just before I start and share my presentation with you, and slightly controversial way to start, but I've previously worked at a few universities, and I always see, in terms of parental engagement, I always see, if you imagine like a spectrum, you often have the parents that are super engaged, the parents that are not engaged at all, and like the middle ground between it. And just to give you an example of what I mean by that, so where parents just aren't engaged with university, that's a real challenge, because you might speak to a student and say to a student, look, there's loads of reasons why you might want to consider university. There's this, there's that, there's this. And if they go back and speak to parents, and parents say, look, no one in our family has ever been to university, etc., and the student might be put off university straight away. And then, so that kind of isn't ideal, where you've got that parental barrier. The other side of the spectrum is like the super engaged. And I think a lot of people that have previously worked at universities will be able to relate to this, where you've got the super engaged parents, where you could be at careers fairs and you've got a student and a parent that will come and approach you as a university, and they'll say, Jimmy wants to do law. And Jimmy's sat there thinking, I don't want to do law. Where the parents are super engaged and perhaps almost kind of take over the decisions from the student, which obviously, again, isn't ideal. And I think the ideal is the middle ground. So hopefully it's like what most of the people that are joining us today are in a position where you're just really keen to find out more about university, to provide brilliant support in the future in relation to the young person who supports university decisions. So it's great to be part of this event. I'm going to share my slides now just to keep me on track. But one thing that Jess mentioned, and one thing that Lindsay mentioned as well, is the chat is open. So as we go through, if you have any questions, anything you want more information on, that is what we're here for, and we're super happy to help you along the way with that. Just before I start my presentation, can someone just confirm? Can you see my slides just on the screen just here?
Yes, John, we can see them.
Thank you. The reason I say that is we all tuned in 15 minutes early to test things, and we just ended up having a little chat. So my intention was to test my presentation. I didn't actually test it, so it's good work. So my name is John Cheek. I run a company called Uni Taste Days, and I always think whenever you've got sessions, it's nice to hear, kind of what the person that's talking to you has previously done before they start. So I've previously worked at 3 unis. I've studied at 3 unis. I've worked with schools all over the UK and some schools in Europe as well. So I should be pretty well placed to talk to you about the key aspects of university. But ultimately, myself, Jess, Sean, and Lindsay, we are here tonight to help you support your young person. So please, A, it's fantastic so many people have joined, and it's brilliant that you have, so thank you for doing so. But B, please, if there's any questions about any aspect of the university, the chat is open. We are all on hand this evening to help you. So please ask us as many questions as you have. That's our job, to make sure that you leave here being able to provide wonderful support to the person that you are supporting. So the one thing I wanted to say just before I speak further about the main topics I wanted to talk about is just to reinforce how important parents are when it comes to decisions at post-18 level that students will make. And there's loads of research to back this up. There's one on the slide just here. You've got an example of a quote that's in this big piece of research that was published back in 2015 that said all sample groups felt that they, as parents, had the biggest influence over their child's important education and career decisions. This just hopefully reinforces just how important you guys are, and how it's great that you're giving up your time on a really sunny evening to find out more about university, so you can provide really good support moving forward. So in terms of what I'm going to cover, so I'm going to talk about essentially the opportunity, why students might want to consider university. And then I'm going to talk about the opportunities that's out there. So I'm going to talk about different universities, different courses, how students can pick universities, how they can pick courses. And my focus is going to be on open days. So as part of my session, the main topic I want to talk about is open days, because I run a university event site. And one of the reasons I do is just I can't underplay how important visiting things like open days are. And hopefully that will come across in this presentation. So open days I'll focus on towards the end, because they're so important. It's such a great opportunity to have a nice day out and find out more about different universities. One quick shout out though before I start is I mentioned I run a company called Uni Taste Days, and we every year produce a Parents Guide to University brochure. Now, I'm not saying this in a promotional way. There's no cost to this. You don't have to even sign up to get a copy. But if after this event you want more information about the key things that parents and guardians should know about university, if you wanted to download the guide, it's a PDF. You can download it without registering. It's just unitasterdays.com/parents. And I'll pop that in the chat when you finish. So you'll be able to get a copy. It's not a case of me putting loads of content together. The content is from expert practitioners. So whereas we produce the guide at Uni Taste Days, we make it look very pretty and designed nicely, the content is from expert practitioners working at different universities. And that's, I think off the top of my head, it's about 55 pages long. Content has been provided from 40 experts at different universities. But it's just a great way for you as parents and guardians to go away from this event this evening and then explore certain areas we cover a little bit further, whether that's student finance, whether that's how to support students when it comes to university applications, whether it's things like the support that's available at universities, because there's loads of student support, things like students encounter any challenges, whether it's financial, whether it's mental health related, etc. There's a lot of support at university, and it covers areas like that as well. So just to confirm, the link there is just unitasterdays.com/parents. It's where you can get a copy without having to register at all. So what I wanted to do first, guys, is actually ask you a question. And now this is actually a session that we as Uni Taste Days run with schools, and actually, and we usually run this with students, but actually I think it's a really good exercise. And I know the time has started. I will give you some time to think about it, but I think it's a really good question for you as parents and guardians to think about as well. So often when we work with students in schools, we'll say, look, why do students consider university? And rather than make really long text paragraphs about the reasons, what we ask students to do is just to think about a few words that summarizes why students might consider university. So when we're working with students, we tend to ask for 5, right? So I'll give you 1, just to give you an example. And then if you just spend a couple of minutes thinking about a few words that you think might be a reason students consider university, I just think it's a really nice way to start this session. So the one I'd start you off with is enjoyment. So that is the enjoyment, and then the context to that is there's a lot of students go to university because they enjoy the course, or they're going to enjoy that university experience. But if you just spend just a couple of minutes, if you can put them in the chat, great. And actually what I'll do is I'll keep this slide on for a minute, just so you've got that there, and if anyone joining wonders what we're doing, if they just see there's a slide up and there's a timer running. So I'll leave the slide running for a minute, and then what I'll do is I'll stop my share and just have a quick look at the chat and see the kind of things that you guys are saying as the reasons that students consider university. So just give you 30 seconds more, pop a few in the chat, and then I'll close it and have a look at your answers. All right, guys, just 10 more seconds. If you don't mind, just putting in a word or two of reasons you consider, then I'll stop my share and have a look at some of the reasons that you've come up. I'll also, in a second, I'll show you the 5 main ones that we often see that students say when working with students. Right, I'm just going to stop the share this time. Cool, right then, let's whiz through. Oh, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for, oh, this is good. I love this. Great stuff. So independence, careers, life experience, dreams, challenge, prospects, independence, experience, life experience, enjoys learning, freedom, independence, new city, new learning, future, prospects come up a lot. I like it. Pathways to future careers. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Right, let's get my slides back up and let's carry on with the session. Oops, Great stuff. So in terms of reasons why a lot of students consider university, the five we often see, and things, I'll continue, but just let me know if you can't see the slides. Hopefully they'll come back up. But the five we often see is enjoyment, where students will say, look, I want to go to university because I enjoy the course. University for most students is 3 years in length. You can do 2-year courses, you can do 4-year courses, 5-year courses, but most university courses are 3 years. So enjoyment is a big, big factor. The second one that students often will say, and I know this might sound a little bit wishy-washy, but it's about making friends. Like a lot of students will want to go to university because of life experiences and making friends. And to put that into context, some universities have 30,000 plus students there. Some unis are absolutely huge. Often universities aren't that big in size, but students are going to be meeting a lot of people. So they're going to be meeting people just like them. They're going to be meeting people completely different to them. And that's just one of many reasons why university is fantastic. Third reason, a lot of students go to university for independence. So let me put that into context. The students can go to university and live independently if they wanted to. They can also stay at home if they didn't want to move away from home. But a lot of students like the thought of doing their own cooking, doing their own cleaning, living independently and experiencing that independence. And that, as parents, I know it might be a concern for you, and you might actually be worried about, you know, how son, daughter, etc. would cope when living away from you. But the big reason why students go to university is related to that independence. The fourth one students will often say, and I'll give you some stats actually to back this up, is related to money. And actually what sometimes we do with schools when we go into and work with students is we'll give students interactive clickers. So they would have a clicker and we'd get them voting on stuff and say, look, here's the 5 reasons just here. Which one for you would be the big reason why you would consider university? And it might surprise you, it might not surprise you to know that money is usually the one that about 3/4 of students will say is their primary driver for going to university. But to put that into context, there was a study back in 2018 that looked at how much people earn by going to university in comparison to how much people earn that didn't go to university. And it's about £10,000 a year more that students earn every year by going to university in comparison to if they didn't. And that's looking at national averages. That's not to say everyone does. Ed Sheeran did not go to university and isn't doing too badly for himself financially. But if you look at national averages, it's about £10,000 a year more that students earn by going to university in comparison to if they didn't. And then the final one is related to jobs. And lots of parents, guardians that joined us this evening said prospects, which is probably a nicer way of saying jobs. And what I mean by that is some jobs need students to go to university, and some jobs it'll be super helpful if they did. So to give you some examples, if students want to be a doctor, a nurse, a physiotherapy, a teacher, a solicitor, and a barrister, a vet, I could continue. University is either going to be essential or probably the easiest way to get to that profession. So for some students, what they actually want to do at the end of their, when they get to their career, will be the driver in terms of choosing to consider university. But the reason I've started with this today in terms of the pre-application stuff is when you're talking to the person you're supporting, if you just have a grasp of why students do consider university, it might really help you when you're having those conversations that no doubt will come up, is in should I or should I not go to university? And I'd say the 5 main reasons that often come up are the ones that are on the slide just here. Oh, my slide's just stalled, just one sec. Cool, so what I'm going to move on to now is what really starting now, taking things a little bit further and starting to explore where students can go and what they can study. And this is linking to the main thing I want to talk about this evening, which is open days. But just to kind of give you go through the choices that students have ahead of them, the first choice they've got is deciding literally is university for them. So having that conversation, and that will often be with you as parents and guardians, is university for me? And that's why we started looking at the main reasons that students tend to consider university. And then the second choice they've got is actually related to course. So it's a case of picking a course that's right for them. And to put that into context, there's 40,000 plus university courses out there. You have heard that right, 40,000 university courses. There is loads and loads and loads of courses out there. So it's just making sure that students, and it's very difficult to pick courses. There's no really easy way of doing it. It's challenging. I'm now 37. What course would I pick? I'm not so sure now, even knowing what I do now, which course I'd pick. So for a student that's 17, 18, trying to think about university and trying to think about courses, it is going to be a challenge. But the picking the right course is a big choice they've got. And then picking the right place for them. And I'm going to talk about place a little bit later on when I talk more about open days as well. That's as part of this session. But one thing that a lot of students often say to me is they'll say, look, John, I want to go to university and I want to open up loads of doors in relation to different universities and different courses. How can I do it? And the example I often give, and feel free, if you can relate to this, feel free to use it yourself, is I often say that university entry is like buying a car. Right, bear with me with this one. And that was like, buying a car. And what I mean by that is if you're buying a car, the more money you've got, the more choice of car that's available for you. And university works just like that, but with grades. The better a student's grades, the more choice they've got when it comes to university and it comes to course, right? So car, more money, more choice in terms of car, but grades in terms of university, the better a student's grades, the more choice they're going to have in relation to course and also obviously university you've got afterwards. So I don't say, you know, work. I don't then answer it and say work. But one key message there is if a student does want to really achieve have the best choice available when it comes to course and university in terms of what's right for them, because it's not always the universities at the top of the league tables. The way they can do that is really to try and work as hard as they can and achieve the grades their potential deserves. So what I want to do just to finish is to talk about open days. Now I mentioned right at the start of the presentation, now I run Uni Taste Days and we're an events website. I'm a big fan of open days. I've also previously worked at 3 universities and I've been part of the open days at those universities as well. And I'm a big fan of them. And one real message hopefully you'll take away from this session is just how useful open days are. And I just want to finish by talking about why open days are important and fingers crossed why hopefully you'll consider going on one in the future. So one thing to say is in terms of finding them, you've got resources like Uni Taste Days, there's various other websites that support you when it comes to finding open days, but all universities will run them. So on Uni Taste Days, I had a quick look before the session today, we've got 121 open days advertised. But open days are great opportunities for universities, right, to showcase themselves and show you as parents and guardians and also students why they might be the right fit for students. But ultimately, I always think they're about ruling universities in for a student, but also giving the opportunity to rule some universities out. Because my experience of being part of open days and speaking to people at open days is very early on in the event, you're going to have a good or a bad feel for a university. And whereas it's very difficult and you've got various barriers in terms of going to open days, whether that's financial, whether that's time, or everything else, they are super useful. And why they're useful is literally universities will open their doors for you, right? The clue is in the title. An open day, everything will be open. Your students and yourself as parents and guardians will be able to speak to academic staff at the university. You'll be able to meet current university students. So you're not just talking to people who are actually delivering the course, you're speaking to students who are actually part of the courses where you can ask them questions. You can also speak to support staff and services. So whether that's the accommodation service, whether that's the student support service, if you're concerned about, you know, perhaps students settling in and things. But ultimately, it's an open all access tour of a university, and they're just such a great opportunity for students to find out more about them. But the one final bullet point you can see on the slide here, my kind of green crucial one, is it gives students an opportunity to have a grasp of the area. And one thing I will say, I've worked, you know, whenever I work with students, one thing I think students perhaps don't think so much about and probably should is how important area is when it comes to studying at university, right? It's so important. And the reason I say that is there's not many times in a student's life where they can decide where they're going to live, right? It's not going to come up very often because usually you've got family commitments or jobs might dictate living and working in a certain area. But university provides an opportunity where a student can say, you know what, I want to live in this area for 3 years, and university will give them the opportunity to do that. So daft things, but that might make sense and might seem obvious, but students don't always do it, is if a student likes the seaside, look at a coastal university. If a student likes the thought of being in a city centre, look at a city-based university. If a student likes the thought of kind of everything being on their doorstep, so they can get out of bed in the halls of residence, which is the accommodation that students stay in. There's perhaps hairdressers on site, there's pubs on site, the lecture theatres are on site, where kind of everything is in one place, almost like a big village or a small town. That's called a campus university. And some students like that. They like that campus environment where everything is kind of in one site. Whereas some students don't like that. They want to be in that city environment where there's loads around them that's perhaps not related to the university. But getting a grasp of the area is just so important. And it's one thing that I don't think students think about enough. And just as a final point in to kind of reinforce that is actually in terms of worries when it comes to university, a lot of students will say, look, my biggest worry is financial, right? Student loans and things. But I often say to students, look, you can make money in the future. You can lose money, you can make money in the future, but what you can't get back is time. And if students are going to study somewhere in an area for 3 years, it's just so important that that area is right for them. And it's just really important that we just don't downplay how important the location is. And just to kind of strengthen that even further, what loads of students do is they actually end up working where they study. So they might get a part-time job at uni and they finish uni and that part-time job might turn into a full-time job. So they stay in that area. Or they might meet their partner at university or a future partner at university. So, for example, I went to university with my now wife. We both went to the same university and ended up staying in the same area. So actually those university decisions might actually dictate where a student will live long term. And it's just really important they think about area. And an open day is a great opportunity for students to actually have a look at an area. So it's not just about the university. Have a look at the area and decide, you know what, do I want to be part of this or do I not? So in terms of open days, things to really be aware of is students need to book open days places usually online. Not always, actually. Some universities might have spaces on the day, but my experience of seeing how a lot of universities approach open days is students will need to book online. One of the reasons, of course, universities do that is then they get some details from you as well, so they can keep you up to date with things during the year as well. And what will then happen usually, and there's a lot of usuallys in this because I'm kind of representing all universities as part of it, is you'll be sent a program. So universities will then say, thank you for booking a place, click here to download a program and work out what you want to do. Other things to be aware of though is there might be travel bursaries available. So some universities offer travel support. So if you're going to struggle in terms of the cost of going to a university, there sometimes is travel bursaries. There's actually sometimes overnight accommodation available as well. And that's stuff that you might have to explore a little bit yourself, or universities that are super proactive in this area might actually let you know beforehand. But my main advice in terms of the before is just to get organised beforehand. So, again, it sounds obvious, but not everyone will think of it. So printing off booking confirmation, planning journey when it comes to parking and things, looking at universities will publish online maps. So before you actually get to a really busy open day, you'll be able to get your bearings in terms of what's where. And then the final thing that's super useful that usually people don't do is actually write out a few questions in advance that you want to make sure you get answers to as part of the actual event. And that actually, I'm conscious of time, so I won't overrun. But one thing that we would usually do now, if there was time, is actually getting you thinking about a few questions that you might think about in relation to an open day. So the type of things that you as parents might want to find out from university. So I won't give you 3 minutes. I want to make sure that I'm the first speaker today. So I want to make sure that I finish promptly at 25 past and I'll be on the chat if anyone's got any questions. So I won't give you the 3 minutes, but I'll just give you just 30 seconds, if you don't mind, just thinking in your mind, or maybe noting a few down in the chat, a few things that you would like to find out from the university when it comes to an open day. And the reason I say that is A, it's useful to think about it in relation to open days, but B, some of those questions that people that are on hand tonight might be able to ask for you. So I'll just give you 10 seconds, a little rest from me, and then I'll show you what I think are the top 10 questions I often see and have seen that students or parents ask at open day. So just give me just 5 more seconds. So what do I think are good questions? So what I've done is pick 10, what I consider 10 good ones in relation to things you can ask at an open day. And these are some of these you might find useful, some not, but I'll whiz through the 10 just now. So firstly, I'd say ask universities what they look for in a subject or student. And the reason I say that is students, when they come to apply to university, will be writing a personal statement. And Lindsay's going to cover that in her session. So actually finding out what universities look for in a subject or a student will really help when it comes to personal statements. The next good question to ask is, how many hours would a student be studying with a member of teaching staff? So for example, how many hours will they be in lectures, tutorials, practicals? The reason I say that is sometimes that you might be surprised by how many contact hours, that's how much actual contact students have with academic staff. Sometimes it can be not very many, sometimes it can be lots. To give you a bit of context to that, I studied business while I was in university and lectures and seminars and things about 10 hours a week. And the expectation then is you do work outside that because it's still a full-time course, you're spending about 10 hours in contact hours. Whereas my wife, she studied fashion design, and it's very practical as a subject. So she was in university pretty much all day, every day. So it's a really good question to ask, just how many contact hours would that course have? It's also really useful to find out what additional support is there to support students' learning. So it could be field trips, it could be, do students have access to a success coach? Is there internship grants if students want to get some work experience? So it's stuff really outside the course, that what opportunities are there? It might actually be study abroad opportunities as well. Ask about the local neighbourhood. It's a good question for parents to ask, but find out more about the area that students will be studying in, and where the accommodation might be. That's really handy. Also linked to that is, where is the accommodation? Sometimes the accommodation is located very close to the university, sometimes it isn't. And then the cost. Now, Sean later on is talking about student finance and budgeting and things, and accommodation costs will vary. So finding out in advance what the cost might be is really handy. Then another good question to ask academic staff is just how many students, what percentage of students pass the first year, and what percentage of students pass the whole course, and just getting a grasp of how well students do on the programme is really useful. Then number 7, I'd say, what do students go on to do? So look at careers in relation to courses. Ultimately, we mentioned when we had the first exercise today, prospects is a big reason that students go to university. So what do students go on to do after the course? Ask about how the course is assessed. Some students will like exams, some students will like coursework, some students might like practicals, presentations and things. Find out how the course is assessed. That will help students when they're on the course. Now, this is a long one. What side teaching is given? So is it hands-on? Is it activity-led? Will students be in workshops? Will it be a case of perhaps in big lecture theatres and things? And what students can then do, and you as parents can do to support them, is actually have a think about what works best for them and what they enjoy most. And then a really good question to ask is just, what makes your course different to similar courses at other institutions? Because you might have a course with the same name at 5 different universities that is absolutely completely different. So what makes your course different? And I think that asking that as a question is going to be a really good place to start. The final thing to give a quick shout out, another free resource that's available for you, is if you're supporting students when it comes to picking courses, one thing that might be handy is we at Uni Taste produce video guides to different courses, and they're very short, 15-minute impartial guides. Again, no registration is required, but if you're having conversations with students and the people you're supporting about why you might want to do a certain course, if you just go to unitastedays.com/on-demand, there's video resources there where students can find out more about studying lots of different subjects in impartial videos. But I hope that has been a whistle-stop, quick, useful tour for you. I'm very conscious of time. Whenever you speak first, you don't want to be the person that makes everyone else overrun. So I think I've pretty much hit it. But I'll be on the chat for as long as you need me for. So if anyone here has any questions at all, please do send them over. Thank you.
Thanks so much, John. That was fantastic. And exactly as John said, it's so important to go to open days. I know, having visited, I think, pretty much every uni in the country over the years, you do get a really kind of instinctive feel as soon as you go onto that campus, and it can be for no real reason, just the way your own opinion of the buildings or the coffee shop, and you might think that doesn't matter, but if that is going to be your son or daughter's home for 3 years, it kind of does, because those are the things that are going to make them feel comfortable and happy, which is what we all want, really. So fantastic. Thank you, John. I should add as well, I think the best question I ever got at the end of an open day talk was, where was your dress from? That definitely was out of the ballpark. Yeah, that was a really good one. So I think I am up next. I'm hoping I'm not talking over anybody else at this point. So I am just going to share a few slides with you all. Okay, so tonight, I am going to give you a really brief overview of the UCAS process and personal statements overall. As with any of the talks tonight, I will be taking any questions in the chat, and I'll be around for the rest of the evening to do that. So please do use that function. If you feel like after this talk you've got something that's still playing on your mind, please ask us. We're here to reassure you as much as possible and to give you as much information as we possibly can. So I've tried to cover everything that I can think in terms of UCAS and personal statements, but if I do miss anything, please do ask as well. So, as I mentioned earlier, I've worked with a lot of universities over the years. I have always mainly been focused on course choice and careers qualified. So that's always been the direction I've headed towards, which means that over the years, I have read thousands and thousands of personal statements and supported many, many students while they've been choosing their courses. I know it can be quite a stressful time, a really exciting time as well. But obviously there's a lot of emotion, a lot of feeling going on at those moments. So I think as parents, it's fantastic that so many of you have shown up tonight to learn as much about this process as possible, and to really support your young people. It's just, yeah, lovely to see, really is. So in terms of the timeline, I'm going to scare you all now at the thought of how quickly it's all going to go. And this will, I promise you, absolutely fly. It always seems like minutes between me first sitting down with a student and finally waving them off to university. So by autumn this year, they will submit their applications. So now is the ideal time to start looking at courses, to start thinking about UCAS and how it all works, because there is the luxury of time to think about all of this while the pressure's off, so that in the autumn term, they can really crack on with those applications, get it submitted nice and early so that the pressure's off and it's not a last minute 10th of December job where your young person is trying to do justice to themselves in a personal statement last minute. I'll explain what a personal statement is in a moment if you're thinking, I don't even know what that is. So spring 2023, your young person should have received all of their offers. They can get different types of offer. So some of them will have grades attached. Those are conditional offers. So if you achieve this, then we will give you a place at our universities. Others are unconditional offers, which is when a student is acceptable to the university exactly as they are. So that is where it doesn't actually matter what their exam results are. They can be sometimes given to sway a student towards a particular institution, and that's something to be a little bit careful of. But generally, they can make students feel safer as well. But most of the offers that you get are going to be conditional offers. So the university will be saying, your son or daughter must achieve this particular grade to get a place at our university. Early summer, your child will then submit their choices. So they will choose a firm choice, which is the university that they will go to if they achieve those grades, and an insurance choice, which is a little bit of a backup, it's a safety net. And that insurance choice should ideally be a slightly lower offer than their firm choice of university. So it does act as a safety net. If they're at the same level, obviously that insurance doesn't really serve its purpose. Then comes August and results day, which is when all the stress levels are pretty high, and by the end of the day, all of the students generally know where they're going to, even if things haven't gone to plan. That is the day when clearing really kicks in as well. Now, clearing is what happens when students don't meet those grades, they don't meet the firm or their insurance offer, and they can then select from universities that have still got places left. And then finally, in autumn 2023, they will go off to university. The big momentous moment that you've all been waiting for and building up to with this talk tonight. So in terms of UCAS itself, it's the University and Colleges Admission Service. They administer most applications to higher education institutions in the UK. You will get odd exceptions to that rule, particularly for places like conservatoires. Some universities will take direct entry, but generally most applications go through UCAS. Students get to apply for 5 courses. Now, as John's just mentioned, there are over 40,000 courses that are available. Your son or daughter gets to choose just 5 on their UCAS application. And if they're applying for medicine, dentistry, veterinary, they can actually only choose 4 from that subject and then 1 supplementary course to go with those other choices. If they're applying to Oxford or Cambridge, which would be fantastic, they usually can only go for one or the other. There are slight exceptions, but as a general rule, it's one or the other. UCAS also manage the extra process, clearing and adjustment. I'll explain what they are very briefly. So extra is for students who don't get any offers or choose to decline all of the offers that they're given next spring. They can then apply to universities one at a time. So it's just another one of those safety nets. You'll notice tonight there are quite a few safety nets built into this process. So it's not there as a you get one chance and that's it process. It's there to try and catch as many students as possible and steer them towards the most appropriate course. So clearing and adjustment are also for that purpose really. Clearing is there for students who don't meet their offers, as we've said, and adjustment is there for students who actually do better than those offers and want to apply after their results to a better or higher entry requirement course than the one that they were originally going to. So there is flexibility in the system, even though it seems a bit rigid. So the application through UCAS contains basic details, name, address, school, all those kind of things. Existing qualifications, which are usually GCSEs, predicted grades, which are generated by the school or college, a teacher reference, and a personal statement. I'll explain a lot more about the personal statements in a moment. UCAS also list all of the university courses on their website, so it's a really good place to start searching, to start generating those ideas for courses, for universities, and where your young person might want to go. I should say as well, those 5 choices, it isn't just a matter of 5 different courses or 5 different universities. They can apply for multiple courses at the same university or different courses at 5 different universities, entirely up to them. So there really is a lot of choice to be made in whittling it down to those 5 simple choices really. When you first go onto UCAS, it can seem really complicated. You can search for courses and there's a lot of strange abbreviations, some strange terms that are there. So it's ucas.ac.uk or ucas.com. When you go onto that site, it's undergraduate courses that you want to search for. That's for students who haven't graduated yet. That's the way to remember it. Some of you may know this already if you've been to university, but I know certainly when I first looked at the course listings, these were what really freaked me out. I had no background of university, neither did my parents, and it all seems a little bit overwhelming. So it's totally natural if you do feel that way. So you might see some letters listed next to courses. So B is for bachelor's. So that's usually your basic degree, 3 years long. You may get some courses where you can apply now for a master's, which would have an M at the beginning. That is a 4-year course and it takes you up to the next level of qualification. So it goes into postgraduate territory. Those letters are then followed by a shortened version of the area that the course sits in. So it could have, for example, BA. That would be a Bachelor of Arts. So a 3-year course in an arts-based area. But it doesn't mean they're going to be whipping out their paintbrushes and pencils. Arts covers so much. So you can have things like psychology, English, even a lot of humanities subjects would still be a BA. It's still considered as arts. And then you'll see usually little brackets afterwards with the words HONS in, which is short for honours, and it just means that that degree has additional credits. It doesn't usually mean extra work. So that would be a Bachelor of Arts with honours, for example, and it's all squashed down to BA HONS. And then if you go into those listings for the courses, it'll give you a lot more information about it and it'll list the entry requirements. Now, again, this can be something that can seem a bit overwhelming when you first have a look. Some of the entry requirements are written as grades. They will always refer to A-level grades, and it's quite simple with those. It's your usual letter format and you can get an idea of the grades that your young person would need. Sometimes, however, there are particular subjects that are needed as well, so it's always worth looking into that in more detail. Don't assume that BBC means BBC in any subject. It will sometimes specify exactly which ones they want. Then you can also get points offers, which again can seem really overwhelming when you first have a look. These points are from each qualification that young person does, and they can be accumulated together. So the best thing to do, this is a rough guide on this screen, but the best thing to do is you can actually go in and get the tariffs on UCAS, and it will convert your son or daughter's qualifications and give you a number of points that they would get for the grades attached to their qualifications. So that's what we mean by those. Okay. In terms of choosing a course, Jess, I think we've got someone who's unmuted. If you could just mute them, that would be great. Thank you. In terms of choosing a course, John's already spoken a lot about this, but in terms of just the little practicalities, when you're first searching, you can put generic terms into UCAS, things like history, and see what comes up. The biggest advice I would give you in terms of exploring choices is to encourage your young person to really explore those choices. So I always think of it a bit like going into a restaurant. If there was a menu with 40,000 choices in a restaurant, you might be really tempted to go for something familiar. However, you could order your fish and chips, for example, and then the next minute the person you're sat with gets this amazing, fantastic dish that you really like the look of and you didn't even know existed. That happens a lot with university courses. Working in outreach for many years, you often see school teachers, parents, go along and do taster sessions for courses and say, if I'd known this existed when I was 18, I would have loved it, but I had no idea. So what I would say is encourage your young person to start exploring now. Even if they are going to type in history or drama, whatever they may be studying at the moment and enjoy, it could lead them into a more niche course. And those courses are often the ones that students really enjoy because it's really tailored to their interests. And often, as a general rule, obviously no promises, they can be the courses with better employment prospects because there are fewer graduates in that area who are qualified for any jobs attached to that course. So it's really, really beneficial to do that exploring, and it can be quite a fun exercise as well. You would not believe some of the courses that are out there, and it's really good to have an explore, find out more about it, and really engage with that process instead of just going for the equivalent of your fish and chips courses. This is Brian Heap's university course guide. It's fantastic. It's likely to be within the library or careers library at your son or daughter's school or college, and it's fantastic. It will list the number of applicants per place, likely interview questions, whether they're likely to get interviewed at all or whether it's going to go off personal statement, reasons for rejection from particular courses, anything you need to know to do with the UCAS process, really. So I would very much recommend that book. Don't try and buy it yourself, it's really expensive. There is no online version. He's a very canny man, but it is a fantastic resource. So encourage your son or daughter to have a look at it in their careers library at school. And you can also have a look at league tables and things like that as well, and also resources like What Do Graduates Do, which will come up if you just Google those words. That's a report that is produced each year, and it will list employment prospects for each course, how many people tend to go on to further study, those kind of things. Really useful information to help you to decide whether this course is going to lead to the career that your son or daughter is hoping for, and what their prospects are likely to be from studying that. However, it's really important to think about love as well as money. I've seen a lot of students over the years who've gone on to particular courses because they have been encouraged lightly by their parents to do so. They've hated the course, they've dropped out, they've ended up with student debt without getting their degree, and really lost their confidence. So love is absolutely crucial when they're going to be studying for 3 years. You have to love that subject. That's what's going to get them out of bed on a rainy Monday morning to go to a lecture. So it has to be there. So in terms of the personal statement, as I mentioned, it's part of the UCAS application. It goes alongside all of that basic information and the teacher reference. It's 47 lines of 4,000 characters, which may sound a fair size. It's usually just over a page in Word. It is a very small word count when it comes to it. It's really, really tight with most people's word count. I've spent many, many, many hours of my life squashing personal statements down to get them within that word count. So every single word, sometimes space, counts. So the same personal statement goes to all 5 of those course choices. So as I mentioned before, that could be 5 different universities, or it could be different departments within a few universities. Most courses don't interview. So for things like social work, nursing, those kinds of areas, you're likely to be interviewed because the way you present yourself is just absolutely crucial. For a lot of other courses, there won't be an interview. So that personal statement is the only way that admissions tutors get to see who your son or daughter really is. So it really can be absolutely crucial. In terms of what goes into the statement, it shifted a little bit over the years. I think particularly when I was younger, personal statements were a lot more about extracurricular stuff. So it was who'd been in the netball team, who was a prefect, all those kind of things. There has been a definite shift in recent years away from that kind of model, and now it is a lot more focused on the course. The main reason for that, I think, is because of the shifts with tuition fees and the way that universities operate. Admissions tutors want to know that they are going to retain students. They don't just want to admit those students who've been prefects. They want to admit students that are going to be there at the end of that course, who are going to have been really successful, who are going to go into the workplace and further the reputation of that university, who they know aren't going to drop out within that first few weeks and potentially leave the university missing about £27,000 out of their departmental budget in tuition fee. Yeah, so they really want to make sure that those students aren't just doing an application on a whim, haven't really thought about their course. They want to know that they fully understand what they're signing up to and that they've got the skills to back that up. So in terms of what goes into that statement, opening section is why they have chosen that course, what draws them to that particular subject out of the 40,000 options that are out there. And this is where students tend to go fall back on cliche. I think most students left to their own devices will actually write a pretty similar personal statement. And it usually starts, I'm applying to study this course because I have a great passion for this subject and have done since the age of 5, something along those kind of lines. And that's what most people write. It's the way to make a personal statement more effective is to go beyond that, to really think about why that course is a good match for them. Yeah, and drill down into that. And that process starts now. It's when they're making those initial choices, when they're thinking about themselves, reflecting on it, and making those decisions about university. Really, really crucial to think about why they want to study that course. Then you get into the territory of backing all of that up. So what skills does your son or daughter have? Are they relevant? And can those be backed up with evidence? And that's where you can fall back on the extracurricular stuff to say, I have been doing this for 5 years and it demonstrates this particular skill. That's where that comes in, when it's used as evidence for skills and making sure it's relevant to the course. All comes back to the course. And then at the end is the conclusion, where your son or daughter is going to summarise everything that's been said in the personal statement and leave the admissions tutor with a really positive impression. So like I say, retention is what they're thinking of. That's what you need to bear in mind when your son or daughter is writing that statement. And that's where a lot of people go off on a tangent, really, talking about extracurricular stuff instead. So in terms of supporting through the panic, it can definitely be a challenge. I would say as well at this point, it is really stressful and it can be challenging to support students through this. absolutely love doing this with young people, because it's such a really fruitful process, not in terms of just generating a statement, but in terms of getting them to recognize who they are, to think about their own skills, and to be certain whether this course is right for them or not. So it is a personal statement. It's about them. They don't have to sound like somebody else. They don't have to write in a voice that doesn't sound natural to them. And what I'd say is, at this point in the year, there is still plenty of time to gain relevant experience or to engage in super curricular activities. Those are activities different to extracurricular, where it's linked to the course that they're applying to. So they can read books that are linked to that subject and give their opinions on them in the personal statement. That's evidence that they know that subject, that they are committing to that subject, and it reassures admissions tutors that they really have committed, that they know what they're signing up for, and they can be retained. It could be field trips, anything that shows that additional interest in the subject, really. What I'd say in terms of offering support from a parent's point of view is, please don't ignore the red flags. I have had, it's awful to say, but true, many students burst into tears while I've been working on them with personal statements. There was one morning where I was being shadowed by a colleague, and I hit my record of 5 sobbing students. And he was like, "What on earth are you doing to these young people?" Thing is, those young people were crying because they were asked about that subject and why they wanted to study it. They couldn't answer that, and that put them back into a place of feeling really unsure of themselves, because they were slowly starting to realize that maybe it wasn't the right course for them. That is okay. I'm never sorry if a student cries for that reason going through a personal statement. Because it is far better to realise at this point now than when they've gone off to university, they have triggered their first instalment of tuition fees, and they've made that commitment. Far better to be crying in front of me in July than it is to be there in October. That's okay. And I would say, at this point, if you do get to a stage where your young person is really questioning that, embrace that uncertainty. It can feel horrid for that young person to suddenly take that step back, but it's a fantastic thing in the long run, because that encourages them to explore more of those courses and to make that right choice. Anybody can fit in at university. There is no type. I have worked in huge institutions where you've got 27,000 students. You can't get 27,000 people who are the same. And I think there's always that temptation to think, no, I'll keep my young person safe by making sure that they're with people that are like them. I'm not going to let them go off to any of the really fancy universities, because they're not going to fit in with people called Tarquin who wear tweed. Those institutions aren't like that. There is nothing to fit into. Yeah, you are going to get people who are called Tarquin, but you're also going to get young people that your child's going to really get on with and fit in with. Yeah, so it's reinforcing that message. There's no type. What I'd say as well, the picture here, by the way, is a cat trying to pretend to be a penguin, which I think is how it can feel for a lot of young people when they're thinking about these decisions and what they're going to do. And for that reason, they can often struggle to identify their own skills. And that's where you, as parents, as people who know them really well, can draw some of these relevant skills out. You can reflect on what they're good at, some of the things that they do on a day-to-day basis, and how they really shine, and link together those skills with the evidence that you see day to day. And this is something that you can start to reflect on even now. Times of pressure that they've been through, things they've struggled with and overcome. So what I would say is a final thing, I'm conscious that I'm very close to time, there isn't just one opportunity. There's always those safety nets that I mentioned. There's extra clearing, adjustment, it's okay not to have that plan at 18. Sometimes people will do a degree and then go into something that they enjoy on the basis of that. Please don't feel like there's a pressure to know what you're going to be doing at 50 when they're only 18. Complete changes of plan are totally normal and can turn out really well. Embrace them, please, because I've seen so many people go, no, it'll be fine, let's apply anyway, and really regret it the following autumn. Please embrace that uncertainty and get to a point where you have explored all options. And finally, they're competing for places against other college students, not Professor Brian Cox or anyone who they've invented in their heads as the perfect student who's far superior to them. It's people just like them that they're competing against. It's always good to remind them of that when they're completing their statements. I've put my contact details up on here. I will have a look at any questions in the chat. I'm not going to address them now because I'm aware that I'm over time now, I think. But I will get back to anyone who's got questions in the chat. My contact details there as well, so please do feel free to get in touch if you have any questions or anything that you want to talk about in future. Thank you very much. Jess, I think you're about to introduce Sean, aren't you? So I'll hand over to you. Thank you, everybody. It's been lovely going through everything with you tonight. I hope it was useful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was very useful. We've actually got a couple of questions in the chat. Sean's answered a couple, which is great. And then I think we've got a few more coming through as well. So if you're able to do that, I'm going to hand over now to Sean Williamson from the University of Chester, and he's going to be covering student finance.
Thanks, Jess. Hi, everyone. Just let me get my screen up and be able to present to everyone. Okay, so hopefully you guys should be able to see these coming up shortly. Yep, I'll whiz back. There you go. So hopefully everyone is able to see the slides. As we've heard mentioned from both Lindsay and John, sort of finance is sort of the starting point for a lot of some of these things, because sometimes students, even as young as sort of at GCSE, will be making options based on whether they wish to go into higher education, and sometimes the misunderstandings relating to finance can impact that decision. So I sometimes missay the word misunderstandings because I also want to say myths. So I say myth understandings, and it sort of works as a word because actually it explains the fact that, you know, there are a lot of myths around student finance, etc. And as we've heard a few times, the number of people here today are absolutely amazing. But also I want, hopefully, as after the end of this presentation, I want to equip all of you with being able to go out there and talk about student finance to other people who weren't here tonight. So whether they are friends, family, etc., to sort of challenge the information that's out there in the news sometimes, because, you know, we hear a lot of MPs and members of parliament talking about student finance, and there is still an awful lot of misunderstanding about the information. A couple of key things before we get into detail. Every single young person across the country can afford to go to university. That is absolutely, without a doubt, that is factually correct. However, because of the figures at play, it's important to make the right decisions about why you go to university, about what the reason is. Do you want to go because you want to go to a particular job that you have to go to university for? You know, all the things we've heard Lindsay and John talk about, that making the right decision, that choice, it reinforces the importance of making the right decision. Finance isn't a reason to not go to university. Finance is a reason to make the right decision about going to university. So really keep that in mind throughout the talk, but also throughout just the decision-making process. So it's making the right decision, it's making sure that students have that informed decision. I wouldn't be lying if I said to you that I could talk to you about student finance for hours, maybe even days. It's incredibly detailed. Sometimes there's a lot of figures thrown about. So I'm going to hopefully try and talk it through in as straightforward process as possible. But it does actually require a lot of signposting to every one of the households that are here today, really. Each household is an individual circumstance, i.e. different household incomes, different circumstances in terms of numbers of learners in the household who may be going to school or going to university, number of parents, guardians, etc. So it's all very complicated. So individual queries we'll often always direct to the phone centre at the Student Finance England, particularly because those guys are dealing with the intricacies of individual circumstances. So this is very much a 25-minute sort of overview of the things that you need to be conscious of, and then it'll be about, okay, what this relates to in terms of me, my circumstances, and the circumstances of the student I'm supporting. So we try and break this up into sort of 3 stages: before you go to university, when you're there, and when you leave. So it's before, during, and after. So everything that I'll talk to you about is sort of bracketed into those categories. So firstly, it's the before you go. So things to consider, you know, this stage we are now, and over the next sort of few months. Obviously, I assume majority of people on the call may be relating to students looking to go to university in 2023, so next September. So there's a little bit of time to be aware of that. Firstly, if you reside in England, you will apply to Student Finance England. You apply to Student Finance England because you live in England. If you chose to go to university in Wales, for example, you'd still be applying to Student Finance England. It's about where you live, not where you go to university. If there are, by the way, happen to be any people in Wales who are on the call, do flag up or give me a shout, just because some of the information is different for residents of Wales. Before you go, make sure you're aware of all the support that may be available beyond the support from the government. Okay, so we'll talk about this as additional funding. So these are bursaries and scholarships from individual universities. None of that is a reason to choose one university over another. So a few years ago, there was a university offering a free laptop to every student that came, and people go, oh, wow, I'm going to go there. And I had to talk to them and go, well, you know, the laptop they probably got on a bulk order. So they maybe got for £80 a unit, £100 a unit, and you're committing yourself to years of repayment. So that figure is by no means a reason to choose one university over another. It's about making the right choice of course, right choice of university, and the right choice of town, as we heard earlier. All those 3 factors are massively important when reinforcing that decision. In terms of thinking about what before you go, the estimate of costs, think about the type of student the student is going to become. Are they living at home and commuting in? Are they a student who's wishing to move maybe down south, maybe to London? Are they a type of student who likes cooking, you know, their own meals and sort of balancing their diet in that way? Or do they like sort of having a bit of freedom to it? All these factors, so socializing, phone bills, so contract or pay as you go, all these factors are part of the, okay, how much is it going to cost me, you know, to be there? It's very difficult to say what students need because every student is different. So, but I will try and address some of that as we go through. In terms of the finance that is available and students can access. So ultimately, the finance that works from government works in 2 different ways. Firstly, it's tuition fee, so the cost of the course. So this pays for the access to the teaching and the facilities that the university is offering. It can be up to £9,250 a year, but the majority of universities do charge that amount. It's paid directly from student finance to the university that they enrol at. So if they don't enrol at the university, that's never triggered, the payment never triggered. So Lindsay mentioned that about actually coming back on and sort of joining, you know, actually later on, that's part of it. It never triggers that payment as such. Also, it's a point that I like to address here because it's paid directly from Student Finance England to the university. That is unlike any other loan you'll ever get. If you get a car loan or a mortgage, technically that money is paid to you and then you use to pay for something else. You never see this loan. It never comes to you. So I like to reinforce the fact that even though they call it a student loan or tuition fee loan, it doesn't act like a loan. And we'll get into more of the detail when we get onto the repayment side of that. Every eligible student receives the same amount. So regardless of household income or personal circumstances, if a student is looking to go to university and they've not been to university before, which I assume the majority of you will be the case, every student receives the amount. And then it's repaid after they leave university. I want us to think about that word repaid though. That word repaid suggests that you're committed to paying the full outstanding amount. That isn't necessarily the case. Okay, so sometimes we hear of this whole system being talked about as a contribution system, as in you, the student, are contributing to the cost of your education. Okay, dependent on how much you earn after you graduate will depend on how much of that contribution you're paying and how much is being picked up by the government. The other cost is the maintenance loan. So this can be used for sort of, I use it very simplistically when I think of it, that's the cost of what it costs to maintain the student whilst they're there. So food, accommodation, transport, course materials, socializing, etc. It is means tested. So the amount will depend on the personal circumstances, ultimately the household income that student calls home. The basic maths of this is that the more income that comes to that household, the more that household is expected to support that child or that student whilst they're at university. Okay, that's a key part of what I say at the start when I say every student can afford to go to university. Okay, the support isn't outlandish. It isn't going to make go, wow, how on earth am I going to spend this money? It's right based on the personal circumstances. So the less the household income, the more support that's available, to a point where they go, okay, we don't expect there to be that household to able to financially support that student whilst they're at university, so we're going to provide the full amount. So I'll talk a little bit more what that means later. This amount is paid in installments throughout the year, and universities have become very savvy, so they normally time accommodation payments with those payments. So when you get your sort of maintenance loan in, that's when they say, okay, right, we'll take a payment for your accommodation. So I'll talk briefly about that afterwards. And the repaid after they leave university, that's the only sort of similarity with the tuition fee loan. Ultimately, what happens is the amount of tuition fee loan gained is added to the maintenance loan, and that's what the student works to repay after they graduate and after they're earning over a certain amount. So we'll touch on that when we get to the after university part. Now, to give you an idea of some of these figures, so these are the figures for students starting in university this September. They may change slightly. We're not expecting huge changes, but it's something to just be aware of. The figures they differ dependent on where the student is going to be living when they go to university. So if you're staying at home and commuting to a nearby university, you're eligible for a certain amount, so 8,000. So I once got asked a question by a student once saying, why do we get given all that money? Staying at home is free. At that point, their parents and guardians obviously chuckled along to that question because nothing is free. So that money is there to support. So you're speaking to someone in my personal circumstance. When I moved out to go to university, when I came back at Christmas, my mum charged me rent. Basically, because, as she said, the cost of running the household increased, so that immediately pushed me out the door to get a part-time job, a winter job, summer job, whatever it may be, to balance that out. If a student moves away from home but outside of London, okay, they're eligible for up to 9,700. Majority of students sort of fall into that category. They're moving away from home to go to university, and as we've heard about, sort of going to that the right university may be one for them. If they're choosing to move to London, they're eligible for more. That takes into account obviously the cost of living increase down there, but obviously we're all going through a cost of living crisis at the moment, so it's about taking all of this into account. Some key words in that though is the words up to. So not everyone will be eligible for that full amount. Basically, those on the lowest household income, so household income less than £25,000 a year, will be eligible for that full amount. And then as that household income increases, they're eligible for less, up to a certain point when everyone will get a certain amount, but then on those on the higher income will receive the same amount as others. So those are the sort of figures to be mindful of. This is a breakdown based on last year's figures, so the figures aren't quite the same, but hopefully it gives you a picture of how it increases. So I'm just going to take one line out of that. So if you look on the household income, if the household income was £40,000 and a student was staying at home to go to university, they'd be eligible for £5,969 per year for maintenance. If they were moving away from home, they'd be eligible for £7,500 or £7,450. And London, it would just be shy of somewhere sort of 10,500. I appreciate that's a blank bit, but gives you a picture of it. So it gives you an idea. Now, one of the things to consider here is accommodation in this. So thinking about the accommodation costs, etc., are all part of the game in terms of understanding your costs. Just to explain the colour coding. So green, that's the full amount. So everyone 25,000 or under will receive that full amount of maintenance loan, if regardless whether it's staying at home, moving away elsewhere, or moving to London. The blue is the sort of the bit where the threshold is breached. So everyone earning 60,000. So even if someone had a household income of 2 million, they'd still be eligible for a loan of 3,500. Okay, they may not choose to get it because of their level of wealth and income, but they would be eligible. So that's where it sort of stops and everyone carries on at the same amount. Extra help may be available if the student going to university has any child or adult dependents, so dependent on them financially, or if they have a disability, including that long-term health condition, mental health condition, or specific learning difficulty. So that support can come in a variety of ways. So access to resources, access to cash, staff support, whatever it may be, but it's based on the individual circumstances of that student. So reinforces what I mentioned before about actually how important it is based on the individual circumstances and the needs of that. I mentioned it before, but just to explain what these two things are, scholarships and bursaries come from individual universities. A scholarship is based on attainment. So something you've achieved may make you eligible for a scholarship. So it could be a grade in music, or you've represented your county in sport, or you've achieved certain grades. That's what a scholarship is. Okay, so if you think you may be eligible for anything like that, make sure you do your research, make sure you get all the money that's available for you. A bursary, however, is based on personal circumstances. So that list below is giving you that sort of, some universities want to encourage, well, we all want to encourage students to come from backgrounds who are underrepresented in higher education. So that comes from low income. It could be students who'd be the first of their family to go to university. They may wish to go to study a particular subject that universities want to encourage more people to go to. So that's where there's a bursary as such. So those are just the terms, and it's just understanding that, making sure that if you think you may be eligible for them, make sure you do that research and you get the available money. Now, very briefly, I'm just going to jump back to that. In terms of the UCAS timeline we heard, finance application kicks in after the UCAS process. Okay, so once you've submitted your application, so this year's UCAS deadline was, I think, the 26th of January. Previous years, it's always been the 15th of January, but the student finance application will often start or open in sort of February, March time. Okay, so, and then they close in May. So there's a short window of a few months for students to make their application. In terms of how to apply, that's the website, gov.uk/student finance. Make sure, well, we encourage students to apply as soon as possible, really. But often students get concerned because they go, well, I don't know where I'm going to be yet, so I can't apply for my finance. The recommendation is, and we really encourage this, apply with where you think you might be going. Okay, so I think I might be going there. Hopefully, if my grades work out, brilliant, choose that one. It's easy to change that later on in the process, say on results day, if you decide to go elsewhere, not a problem. The danger comes is when students wait until results day to then make their finance application, and that can cause a difficulty. So we say apply with a preferred choice, and this can change later. So Student Finance England, their Twitter account is often the best way to find out when the application's open. It's never an exact date. So a couple of years ago, it was 25th of February. Recently, it's mostly been March. So it's just being aware of it. So hopefully schools, teachers should be able to notify you when that's the case. That's the gov.uk website. So very simple, very clean, clean design, etc. Should be nice and straightforward. But there are plenty of other resources out there, whether it's on the UCAS website or on Student Room, that hopefully give you all the information you need to be able to find the circumstances and the extra support that may be eligible for you. In terms of how a parent or caregiver provides support to the application, ultimately, that's the wording that we're using. You're supporting your child's or your student's application for financial support. Okay, so that may require you to provide evidence of how much the household income earns. So that's normally based on the previous year's tax year. So if students were applying for going into university in September 2023, they'd be making the application before the end of that tax year, i.e. in April 2023. So it'd be based on the tax year that we've just passed in 2022. If that, however, has changed significantly, whether the income has gone up or the income has gone down, they can make adjustments for that. So we saw that a great deal last time we had sort of the credit crunch and different things. Income was changing quite significantly between people changing jobs or people getting new jobs, etc. It's always based on that previous, but it can change. It's a significant part of that financial application because so much of this support is based on the individual means, making sure the support is there for it. If at any point the student decides not to go, all of this is not triggered if the student never enrolls. Okay, so it never starts the commencement. If, however, a student starts a course and then within a couple of weeks suddenly decides not to, we heard this from both Lindsay and John, the importance of making the right decision. So I often say, when it comes to UCAS application, the UCAS application goes when it's right. Okay, it shouldn't be rushed. Okay, but you've got plenty of time to do it well in advance of the UCAS deadline. And all of these checks and balances that we're putting through are about making sure that a student doesn't start on a course and go, you know what, this isn't the right course for me. So part of the application process is about saying, we as a university going, okay, is this student really wanting this course? So they really, how have they shown their commitment to their course? Another option, students can choose to defer. So it's actually putting it off for a year. So the finance situation sort of stays sort of in stasis up until that point. But if a student does start and sort of does a part of their course, payment is required. Okay, certain parts of it. So it's not the full year, but it can be a case of if it's a few weeks, it may be a term, so it may be a proportion of that fee. My advice is we make sure that this isn't the case. We make sure that a student, has made their UCAS application, the finance application, really reinforcing the fact that, yes, this is the right decision for me. Other parts to think about before or during is student bank accounts. So a lot of banks are offering the different benefits, so with overdrafts, credit cards, but I include that with a very much a warning sticker. Credit cards aren't a good form of debt. They're what may be called toxic debt or bad debt, for example, whereas in an interest-free overdraft or the student loan are seen as positive forms of debt. If there can be such a thing, this is one of them. So make sure you're aware of the different packages that might be suitable for you and make that informed decision. So in a minuscule level, this is so similar to choosing to go to university, making the right decision. So whilst you're at university, okay, the during, make sure you complete your enrollment. Using those estimated costs, stick to a budget. If you had 30, 40 quid assigned to food, stick to it. Don't go silly with it. I know people talk about socializing as part of where people can get out with money and support. I think food costs can also get out of hand if people don't know how to budget their food costs, don't know how to manage their expenditure in that way. So make sure you're aware of it. You also reapply for finance every year. So all of this information is to be replicated each year of the degree. So this is where that picks up any changes in year. So any changes in household income, either up or down, may affect how much you're eligible for to support that maintenance loan particularly. Okay, some students choose to leave, return home in second year and commute in. I'd always do it that way. Weirdly, some students choose to stay at home first and second year and then move into university accommodation in the third year. I'd flip that. If that was a consideration of yours, moving to first year, that's where you find your feet, you make your friends, you meet flatmates, etc., etc. Then when the course and the requirements of the course ramp up in the second year, third year, you're not going to be going out as often. That's when maybe going back home, commuting in, gives you a bit more sort of headspace to focus on the study. That balance of it is sometimes worth considering it. If that's relevant for you, you may not be moving close enough to be able to do that. It can't change during your studies or after. Okay, so the payment thresholds will remain the same. There is some confusion over all of this, obviously, because government keeps talking about making certain changes to fees and repayments, etc. A lot of this so affects it from this point on. So for students entering from 2023 onwards, if they choose to change it again in a number of years' time, what they will often do, what they have done previously, is changed it for students entering from that point onwards. So something to keep in mind for when all these news can be in the media, etc. Just to say, part-time job, we're seeing more and more students using part-time employment to supplement. Universities advise no more than 16 hours a week, because any more than that, it'll begin to negatively impact the studies ultimately. But a lot of people choose to sort of stay with the company and maybe transfer. I did that. I moved from a Sainsbury's in Sheffield to a Sainsbury's in Liverpool. But there's plenty of jobs and plenty of opportunities out there for students. Universities ourselves, for example, we run a uni job scheme. So, students can be employed to support our work, going into schools, colleges, etc. In terms of when you leave, this is probably the bit that I need to sort of focus on. So I won't try and rush through this, but I'll try and cover the main headlines. After you leave university, you won't only start to repay your loan in the April after you graduate. So students who are leaving university this summer, even if they go into a really highly paid graduate job, they won't pay anything until the April after they leave university. Okay, and remember, what we're talking about here is the maintenance loan and the tuition fee loan added together, and that's what you're working to repay. You'll not repay anything you earn until you earn over that threshold. Now, this is where it's complicated a little bit. So the majority of you will be entering university in 2023. So the government has announced a change for that repayment threshold. So it will be £25,000 a year. That's what you'll work to repay over. Okay, now I'll explain what that means. You will repay 9% of your earnings above that figure. Okay, so if your first graduate salary was £26,000 a year, so when will that be? In 2026, if you're doing a 3-year degree. If your first graduate salary is £26,000 a year, which is now, that's a very good graduate salary, you would be repaying 9% of £1,000, because that's how much is over that threshold. So 9% of £1,000 is £90. Divide that by 12 months in a year, the student would be paying £7.50 a month off of whatever that big amount is that has been added together. £7.50 a month is a manageable amount. Okay, the repayments are all taken through the tax system. So beneficially, it's taken out of your gross salary rather than your net. So it's not as much of a wedge of your take-home pay as such. But this is a big but repayments stop, and for you guys entering in 2023, they will stop after 40 years. So ultimately, the majority of working life. Okay, so if you work until your sort of early 60s, there'll be a proportion of your salary coming out to contribute to the cost of tuition fees. So that change is significant. That hasn't made a lot of headlines in the last few weeks, but it is significant. However, 9% of your earnings over £25,000 a year. This is why I say at the very start, every one of you can afford to go to university. But the question is going to university going to help you earn more money across your time in your career? And we heard from John, the statistics say that's the case, up to £10,000 a year increased. But it's also about, will it help you have the career and the life you want? Okay, people will become, we heard about Ed Sheeran, but we all know examples of tradesmen and people who start their own businesses, etc. This is where it really turns the light on the individual student. Is going to university going to help you become more successful? So whether that is money or whether that is the dream job, whether that's going into nursing or education, that's what we need to think about. Everyone can afford to go, but you'll be contributing a little bit of your salary for a significant part of, if not all of your career. However, I would very much like this to be referred to as a tax system, because that's ultimately what it is. It's an amount of your salary for a certain amount, okay, based on your earnings. So the more you earn, the more you pay. The less you earn, the less you pay. In every other form of language, it's a tax, but it's not referred to as a tax because actually there's a figure there to repay at the end of this. In terms of things to just remember with that, it's always based on your income rather than what you owe. That sounds like a really simple sentence, but actually that's unlike any other loan ever, okay? Every other form of loan, car loan or mortgage, they work out how much you borrowed, they apply a rate of interest, and they work out how long you're going to repay it for, and that's your repayments. So 30 years for a mortgage, 5 years for a car loan, whatever it may be. Here, entirely linked to your income. It's a very different type of loan. So I would love it if we didn't call it a tuition fee loan or student loan, because actually it doesn't work like a loan. But it's important to remember that. You'll never be asked to repay what you owe in full. The loan belongs to you, so it isn't passed on to anyone. It can't be passed on to a family member or partner. It isn't sort of a commitment as such. If income ever falls below the threshold, repayments stop. Okay, again, unlike a car loan, touch wood, if I lost my job tomorrow, I would still have to pay my mortgage in a few weeks' time and my car loan in a few weeks' time. This, however, not the case. If students choose to work abroad, this is based on a local sort of figure on the tax system, ultimately linked to cost of living. So the 25,000 figure is based on what is the average salary of this country. They work out a similar figure for the country you may emigrate to, and then you'd repay on a yearly basis, on an annual payment basis. That's what would also happen for self-employed people when they make their tax return. They work out the figures, they work out how much income they had at the end of it, and then that would tell them how much they owe in that respect. It doesn't affect your ability to buy a house or car, so it doesn't show up on credit scores or credit rating. And for a mortgage, it's referred to as a committed expenditure. Okay, so mortgage company will go, okay, well, the more that amount will always be a proportion of your salary. So they're concerned with your ability to repay and your ability to afford to repay. So it doesn't negatively affect that. And sometimes people often talk about the interest rates that's applied and the figures, etc. This just shows a few more basic figures of what that monthly repayment will look at. There is interest applied to these loans, but weirdly, it could be an unbelievable figure. But I often come at this and going, okay, think of it as 40 years of repayment. The interest being applied to it is going to grow and grow and grow. And we often see in the news headlines of students going outrageous, interest rate increases. But the only thing that affects the repayment is how much the person earns, okay? And after 40 years, it will be written off. So if you come to terms with the idea that you will repay for 40 years, the more you earn, the more you pay, the less you earn, the less you pay, that's what we want to aim at. Okay, I think Martin Lewis worked it out. I think it's maybe 60-odd%, maybe 50-60% of people will be repaying for 40 years, with the highest earning 40%, so to speak, paying it before then. The interest applied to it simply makes it more likely that students will repay. So very briefly, and I'm conscious I've gone over time, but Jess said I could, so I'll get away with it like that. Tuition fee loan is available to all eligible students. So as I said, it's there for you. It's calculated for each individual, the maintenance loan, so based on personal circumstances. Make sure you're aware of the research that may be available to you. There are all manners of different bursaries, scholarships, for all various different criteria, some run by university, some run by local authority. So make sure you're aware of what you get. Apply online and on time, so no need to wait for that confirmed place. The loan is considered that non-toxic debt, meaning it will not affect credit rating. And that line at the end bears repeating and repeating. Repayments will be linked to your income, not what you owe. So the question isn't, can you afford to go to university? The question is going to university going to help you earn more money? We've heard that statistic as well from John at the start, that it does help graduates on average earn, but also think about you as an individual. Is university the right route for you? Is making the right choice of course or location or university really reinforces the importance of making that decision. Okay, so make sure that providing, this is often funding will only be provided that once, so a course length of a degree plus a year. So make sure you make the right decision. So don't just flippantly choose a university because someone said it was great, or someone who went there and they had a great time. It's about you making that decision. Just to reinforce a few points, so those Twitter links and the website links, so that's where a huge amount of more information is. And as said, what I'll try and do, I'll try and answer the questions that have been in the chat, as if colleagues haven't already, whilst Jess is talking. And thank you for your time, everyone. So I'll just hand over to you, Jess, and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Sean. That was so helpful. I think student finance is one of the biggest elements of higher education that people want to know about. There's been a lot of questions. We always expect it with this subject. So between Lindsay, John and myself, we have answered a few, but I don't know if you want to scroll even further up just in case we've missed a few. What I'm going to do, I am very conscious of time. I did say to Sean he could go over. I'm just going to do a little bit of a whistle-stop tour of student life and what it's like as a university student. So I did go to university. It was many years ago, so it's not entirely from my own perspective, but obviously as I went, I can share some stories and whatnot of what's happened while I was there. So yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about that and the experience that your young person might have should they choose to go to university. So I always start with this slide when I talk to young people, actually, because I like to tell people, like, what sort of people or what type of people do you think go to university? And they will usually say, the really clever ones or the ones with loads of money. And that's exactly what I used to think as well. But what I always like to share with people is there really is no typical university student. Every single person that goes to university is completely unique, all from different backgrounds, different cultures. You typically have to be 18 years old to go, but all different ages of people that go. There was a lady on my course. I went when I was 19. I had a year out first. I went when I was 19. There was a lady on my course that was in her 40s, which was just lovely to meet different people that way. And I've actually just written on here, there's over 50,000 courses, but I think John said 40. So I'm going to go off what John said, but that is still a lot of courses out there and available to people. So when we think of university, we tend to typically think of people who want to become doctors or lawyers or teachers or go into healthcare and other sectors. But when you think that there are 40,000 different types of courses out there, it's an entire range of students. So no one's a typical student. And also everybody has a different reason for going. So when John asked you to do that little exercise at the start, obviously it was quite nice to see why people might go to university. So we talked about things like a career prospect, for experience, maybe to move away. There's all different types of reasons to go. What I tend to tell young people is that there's no wrong reason to go. There's definitely wrong reasons to choose a particular university. As John mentioned, I would also say you don't want to pick the one just because your friend's gone, or because someone else said they had a great time there. I think Sean said that. So there's wrong reasons to choose a university, but everybody goes for their own reason, whether that's a career, they like studying and they want to continue, they want that independence and that experience. There's also, even though there's lots of different types of students, there's also lots of different types of universities as well. So just a very quick whistle-stop tour and a few examples. So you might get a specialist university. So that might relate to the subject that somebody studies. I've just put as an example here, the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama. Obviously, there's lots of others. You might get a fairly small university. So Harper Adams, it's actually also a specialist university. It does a lot of agricultural based courses, but that tends to only take on about 3,000 students. So it's very small, it's all on one campus, and most people all know each other as well. Whereas your bigger universities, such as Manchester Metropolitan, it's spread across the whole city, and they have a huge amount. They have about 37,000 students. You also might have your more traditional universities, so kind of what we picture in our heads when we think of university or when we see them on the films. Oxford and Cambridge are extremely traditional in terms of their architecture. But places like Keele University are very traditional in the sense of how their campus is built up. So everything is on one site, including accommodation and all the facilities, and where they do all their learning as well. Or you might have something that's a little bit more modern. So the example I've picked here is, for example, Leeds University. I know that well because that's where my friends went and I would go visit them. And all their facilities, accommodation, learning centres is just spread right across the city. So again, going back to what John was saying, when it comes to choosing a university, it's getting that right feeling. So the campus visits, the open days, they are so important just to get a feel of what you might like. So what I would say as a student as well, it really does become a home from home. So what we call in first year university is the halls of residence. So we've covered a bit of accommodation on here, and there's been a few questions answered on that. What I will say, I will tell you my own experience of that. So when I was applying for my accommodation, I was feeling very independent at 19. I wanted mixed accommodation, so boys and girls, and I wanted self-catered. So I thought I can cook my own meals. Now, even though you put your application in, and a lot of universities have what's called like accommodation guarantee. If you get your place and you get your application in early, you will get accommodation, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get, or your young person, sorry, is going to get exactly what they requested. So I actually ended up in my first year of university living with 30 girls, and we were catered for. So we went to like a dining hall every day. When I first moved in, the idea of living with 30 girls would have been my worst nightmare. And sometimes it's a parent or guardian's natural instinct to be disappointed for them. But what I will say is, whatever sort of accommodation your young person does end up with, 9 times out of 10, they're absolutely going to love it. I ended up being best friends with lots of the girls that I lived with. some of them became my bridesmaids. And actually, I really like the fact that in first year uni, someone did all my cooking for me. It made socialising a lot easier. If your young person or your child moves to university and they're really not happy with where they live, and it is actually having a bit of an effect on their time there, they can always move. There are teams of people for support. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But it can be, it's a large part of university because you have your housemates, it's where you go to relax and unwind, and you want it to be a safe place for people to stay as well. So if anybody ever moves and they phone you and they're not happy, you can always just convince them and tell them that they can speak to somebody about that. They don't have to, drop out of university or just put up with it. They can move on. So as well, on campuses and in universities, you've got obviously a library, there's a gym, there's a laundrette. Just to bust a myth there, students do use the laundrette. There's obviously all the lecture and seminar rooms where all the classes take place, high-end IT suites. There's also things like coffee shops and cafes and what's called the Students' Union. Some may even have a restaurant on site or a bar or pub. And there's, again, all of that student support, which I'll talk a bit more about in a moment. So when your young person, or if your young person decides to go to university, just know that it will eventually become very much a home from home for them. If they decide to stay at home, that's also absolutely fine. I had a lot of friends that did that, and they still managed to get a really full experience at university. So I think John mentioned a little bit about this already, but I'm just going to talk a little bit about the learning side of university. So on average, students are going to university and they have contact time between 18 to 24 hours. Now, John mentioned that he did about 10 hours a week, and this is saying average is 18 to 24. It completely varies depending on the subject that you're studying. So, for example, I studied drama and theatre, and I would say I was there a lot more than 18 to 24 hours a week. That is because in terms of the demand within drama and theatre of rehearsal times and group work, so it's not just studying on your own, you're part of a cast in a play, or you're giving a presentation on something, so a lot of the contact time was a lot longer. But then again, you might do a course like John did, I'm very jealous, where it's 10 hours. That's the contact time with your tutors and your seminars and lectures. But then what that allows for is all the spare time after it for independent learning. So when that young person gets to university, it really is a matter of maybe some discipline, and knowing that they are only going to get out of university what they put in. I do often tell young people university is very much like a gym membership. So you can pay for it or use student loan to pay for it, but the effort and the time and effort that you put in is going to reflect not only grades, but also maybe your experience after graduation as well. So I'll talk a little bit about the social side as well of university. I like to talk about this side a lot with young people because it's almost a stereotype that students are wild and crazy and they love to party, but I'm very obviously consciously aware that that actually isn't appealing to a lot of people. I'm not one of them, but I do know that a lot of students actually have a fair bit of anxiety when it comes to that side of things, very understandably. So I'll just talk a little bit more about sort of what availability there is in terms of socialising. So I've just put here, it's not, well, it isn't all pot noodles and 3 p.m. wake up. So again, people like to stereotype students. We use the laundrette, I promise. Students love to cook. They don't just have terrible diets, and certainly don't lie until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I was in rehearsals at 9 a.m. sharp. So at university, we have what's called clubs and societies. I will talk a little bit more about them in a moment, but they are one of the main sort of elements of university when it comes to socialising. Obviously, you will live with housemates. You might want to cook together, socialise together, and also they're a really good group of people that look after each other as well. You'll obviously make friends on your course. And what I always say as well with students is they have a voice. So students are extremely, I would say, politically aware. Well, I personally, when I was a student, that was when I became a little bit more aware of the wider world, because I was meeting new people, I was having conversations with my lecturers. So you might know that students are quite often they go on protests for various things. So gaining that voice is really important for someone's development. So yeah, I've said here, it's not just 3 years of constant parties. If nightlife isn't a thing for your young person or child, there are so many different social activities out there as well. And what I always say to parents, guardians, and the young people that are a little bit nervous or worried or anxious about it is that if you go to university, you do find your people as well. So this is a little bit more on those clubs and societies. So what I always say is that you have your usual sports teams. So that might be things like rugby, football, hockey, netball, tennis, rounders, all those sorts of things. But what's great is that you also have some unusual clubs and societies. So a couple of ones on here, we've got somebody doing skydiving. The picture at the top looks like someone's actually playing rugby, but if you look a little bit closer, they've got like almost like a broomstick between their legs, and they're actually playing Quidditch. From Harry Potter. Things like LGBTQ+, different faiths and religions, charity. So lots of things that your young person can get really stuck in and involved with. And like I say, it's usually a club or society where you find some very like-minded people. This happens every Wednesday afternoon, so it's collapsed timetable. We don't tend to have that many lectures or lessons, and then they all get together. So I didn't do a full count, but I had a brief look at a lot of the ranking of the societies in the UK, and just flicking through all the pages, I worked out that there is about over 17,000 different clubs and societies across all the UK universities. So there's a lot. So as well, just to stress that student support for your young person, one of the first types of support they'll come across is a student ambassador. So Sean mentioned we have uni jobs. So this is actually actual students, they're usually 2nd or 3rd year, and they work for the university as well as studying there. So it's a bit of a part-time job for them, and they will welcome all the first years, they'll show them where to go, they'll get them settled in, and they can also answer any questions as well. So I have a very distant memory from years ago of student ambassadors ushering me through registration, showing me where to pick up my ID card, showing me where my accommodation was. So they're all there to support and help. There is also lots and lots of support on campus, full-time workers that are there, that is their job. So there's people there that can advise and help with any queries or worries about student finance or money. There's disability support, mental health support, study skills support. The study skills support, I would say, if your young person might express if they're struggling in any way, just to reach out. That was something I struggled with a fair bit at university. I did drama and theatre, so I loved practical work, but obviously there's also an element of essay writing. So I didn't let it hold me back. I still went to university and I still studied and got my degree. I even went on and got my master's degree, but I really did require some additional support when it came to my study skills. So that was something I heavily leaned on, and it got me through. As I said, there is always somebody for your young person to reach out to and talk to if for whatever reason they need support or are struggling. They can reach out to anybody in that list above. people they live with. They can even talk to their lecturers. And we always encourage to talk to people at home as well, so that you guys know what's going on. So I will just end on this because I am very conscious of time and it's everybody's evening. Thank you for sticking with us, for those that have. What I always say is, whatever course your young person chooses to do, hopefully they will have gone through that process that John's talked about, with going and visiting universities, getting a feeling for it, what Lindsay's covered in terms of taking their time with their personal statements and their choices, researching and knowing that the universities they're going for and the courses they're choosing, you know, are not just thinking about their career and their future, but something they will love and really enjoy. And of course, obviously, they'll have that support from student finance. But what I always say is, whatever course they go for and study, I hear a lot of parents, or maybe actually even older generation, who will say that a degree, some people's degrees are a waste of time. Now, I am a drama graduate. I studied theatre. And of course, you don't see me touring and performing on stage. But what I will say is that every degree that any student does, they are going to gain the most vital transferable skills. So you can see them listed here. There's communication, teamwork, problem solving, meeting deadlines, independence, presentation skills, networking, and even the work experience that comes along with university. All these skills that you get from any degree is a high requirement when it comes to employment. So I'm not saying you don't get these skills elsewhere, but at university, you go through 3 years or more developing such strong skills in these areas. So for me, I actually chose theatre because I loved drama at school. I was very active. I didn't really like to sit and go through a workbook. I ended up choosing drama because I liked it. Chester I got a good feel for the campus. It was not too far from home. The city wasn't overwhelming for me. And then while studying my degree, I actually ended up really falling in love with theatre within education, which is how I then ended up working within education. So whatever journey your young person goes through, it is guaranteed they'll come out the other end with some really incredible skills that are going to make them stand out when it comes to interviews and going for a job. I will just end quickly with this. So as I mentioned earlier, I work for Higher Horizons. We are based at Chester, Keele, Harper Adams University. And if yourself or your young person at all has any questions, you can contact us on our safe chat platform, which is at higherhorizons.co.uk/ask. And we will be sending out a recording of this session tonight, along with the survey that I did mention earlier. So that was a very quick whistle-stop tour because I'm so conscious of time. I just want to say a really big thank you to all our speakers tonight. Sean, Lindsay and John, you've been fabulous and you've relayed some really vital information there. So thank you so much. And a big thank you to everybody that has joined us tonight. And because of the time and this beautiful weather, those that have stuck with us as well. So thank you all. And I will actually just stop recording here.